I see a lot of members, CVIA members here, so I want to thank you all for coming. Um, this is going to be an informative session. We're excited to have a lot of exciting guest speakers come and talk to us about the San Francisco Family Zoning Program. And I would like to, if you're not aware of it, just give a quick plug for CVIA. We are a members association that is responsible for improving the greater Haight-Ashbury and Coal Valley neighborhoods. We do a lot of community outreach and a lot of programs, such as our Santa on Coal, Cleaning Coal Streets, and participating with the fair and a lot of other social activities. So, and hosting events like this. So thank you all for coming. We hold monthly board meetings. If you are a member and would like to attend those, just let me know and I'll add you to the distribution list and you're welcome to join us at one of our meetings. But we'd like to thank you for being a member. If you're not a member, please contribute. We also have a wonderful newsletter that you'll get on a quarterly basis if you're a member. So thank you very much. We're also co-hosting this with the Coal Valley Merchants Association, and we have the president of that with us. So Dan, let me introduce you and let you say a few words.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Well, thank you all for being here. My name is Dan Surratt. I'm one of the owners of Finnegan's Wake, and as a merchant in Coal Valley, we formed an association after all these years, decades of time. We finally did it in 2023. So we've got the string lights up in the neighborhood. We've been doing some night markets, and we heard about this pending proposed legislation that we know will affect our city, and hopefully for the good. Obviously, there is, if you look at the proposed map, there is an area that is directly in our commercial corridor on Parnassus, and it's really small to read. I'll let them blow up the map on the screen, but I know it will affect our neighborhood. So we thought it'd be important to have a meeting and offer this to the community so we can talk about and listen to what the proposal is. Thank you, CVIA, for taking the laboring oar, because they did everything. So really appreciate all the help. Thank you all for being here. The merchants meet the third Wednesday of the month at Coal Valley Tavern at 9 a.m. It's open to the public. You're free to come by. Thanks a lot.
Cool. Guys, so a little bit about the format here. So we have, as I mentioned, a presentation from some of the city planning folks, and we'll go through about a 20-minute, 25-minute presentation, and then there'll be some time for questions and answers afterwards. So if you have questions, you'll get a chance to ask them after the presentation. But I'd like to turn it over to the folks that are going to run the presentation. I'll start with having our District 8 supervisor and the president of the Board of Supervisors, Raphael Mandelman, come up and introduce the topic and the speakers.
Hello. Okay. I'm going to be super brief because, as you can hear, I am losing my voice. But I am Raphael Mandelman, and since 2022, I think, in the redistricting, I have been you have been in, well, not here, you aren't, but a block or two that way, you are in District 8, and it's been an honor to represent you, and I will continue to represent you on the Board of Supervisors until the end of next year. You have a supervisor election coming up next year, so get ready to meet a bunch of candidates. Get excited. Democracy. If we have elections next year, we'll be picking new local leadership. I want to introduce, I get 4 legislative aides. One of my most amazing, don't tell the others. My most amazing legislative aide, Melanie Mathewson, is the, big applause. Actually, some of you may know Calvin Ho, who was the Coal Valley point person. Calvin, since I've become board president, has been inundated with responsibilities, and Calvin's also pretty great. So, but we wanted to free up a little bit of his time to manage board agendas and things like that. So Melanie has stepped in to be the Coal Valley point person, and feel free to reach out to either one of us about planning and zoning issues, or transportation and traffic, or crime, or anything else that is concerning to you. One way of reaching our office is to email mandelmanstaff@sfgov.org. I do office hours pretty much every month, so if you want to come talk to me for 10 minutes in a cafe or get on a Zoom with me, I'm happy to do that. If it turns out that we need more than 10 minutes, happy to do that too. Mel and I are also going to be working on a public safety town hall, ideally with CVIA and CVMA. If you guys are interested in working on that, hoping to bring the DA. You have a new park station captain who you should all meet, and maybe bring some of the public health folks from the city over to talk to you. And we'll be trying to do that this fall. So today you're going to get to learn about and provide feedback on the proposed family zoning program. San Francisco must adopt a significant upzoning prior to January 2026. The planning department has been working on this for a very long time. At the beginning of last year, the Board of Supervisors approved our updated housing element for our general plan. And in that document, as we were required to do, we laid out a general plan to add 82,000, to create the capacity for 82,000 additional housing units in San Francisco. That's a requirement of the state. And the state is also requiring a number of other subsequent pieces of legislation, but part of that is this upzoning. The folks in the planning department, I think, have been thoughtful and have tried to do that in ways that protect some of the things that we care about in many of our neighborhoods, protect rent-controlled housing, and generally are consistent with the San Francisco that we love. That does not mean they've gotten everything right, and it doesn't mean that there are not opportunities to make some changes. But we do have to adopt something, and it does have to be a significant enough upzoning that the state blesses it and says, yes, you have met your obligation to us after we submit it in January of 2026 or sooner. So there are many things to be potentially concerned about. And so you can, and many of those things are things that, as I said, the planning department has tried to address. I have indicated my particular concern about historic resources and what happens to them. If this plan works as intended, we're going to get a bunch more housing units. In general, that is a good thing. San Francisco has a shortage of housing. California has a severe shortage of housing. People can debate this. I believe those things. And we need to have more housing. But the concern I've expressed and have talked about a good deal with planning staff is that if we encourage a whole lot more development and don't have protections in place for historic buildings, we may lose some buildings along the way that have not been protected, that are pretty important to our city, and that we will regret having lost. So we're working with planning on how best to address that. There are some protections under state law that you can provide for designated historic landmarks and in historic districts. And so I'm talking to planning about how to do that in an expeditious way to allow lots and lots of development and not lose some of the most important historic stuff. That's my priority, and I'm grateful to planning staff for being willing to engage around that. So you're going to hear today from Lisa Chen and Sarah Richardson, who are going to present to you about this plan. And I will take my raspy voice and go away now.
Sure. So I'm going to try to move this around so you can actually see me over the computer. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I hope people had a great summer. It seems like the cool weather's coming in again this week. So can people hear me in the back? Yeah? Great. Okay. So again, my name is Lisa Chen, and I'm a principal planner and the plan manager for the Family Zoning Plan. And I'm joined by my fabulous colleague, Sarah Richardson, who's been leading a lot of our research and our policy development around small businesses specifically. But today we're here to kind of give you an overview of the plan, kind of soup to nuts. And as President Mandelman noted, also talk about some of the ways that we are incorporating some of the questions and concerns that we've heard and how we've tried to address them. I didn't actually include our slides on historic preservation, but maybe I can just use a moment to also emphasize that is a key goal of the plan as well. We were actually at the Historic Preservation Commission today, and we're actually collaborating with them on a letter of recommendations to give to the Planning Commission, in particular to create more incentives around preserving historic resources. So that will be coming soon, and I think we're getting to a good collaborative place there with the Historic Preservation Commission. Just before we get into the details, because there are, as you're going to see, many, many details to get through, just at the highest level, this plan is not just about meeting a state requirement, although, as the president pointed out, that is a critical piece that we must meet. It really is thinking about the future of our city and thinking about who we want to be and thinking about making space for change and to make sure that we have the housing that will meet our needs now and in the future. And so that means that if you are a family that's looking to grow into a larger space, if you're a senior looking to downsize, if you're a recent college grad who's trying to find their first steps in the housing market in the city, that you have options available to you. Because we know that right now, the housing system is not working for many, many people. And there's many statistics that we could use and that we have used over the years. We've actually been at this for 3 years now. But this is just one of them. But basically, you may have seen in the news that rents in San Francisco grew faster in our city than anywhere else in the country this summer. It was 11% year over year. Vacancies are way down to where they were pre-pandemic. We are once again hitting a critical crunch point in our housing market. So this is just one example. You know, it really is our low and our middle income earners who are the hardest hit in this housing market. So this statistic is basically saying that it would take the equivalent of 4 minimum wage jobs to afford an average rent in San Francisco. And this is actually out of date because, as I noted, this summer the rent grew so much. So this is, you know, data from I think last year or so. But the point being that there are many people who are left out of our current housing market. And the same story is true for our ownership market, right? That has actually risen even more dramatically. We've seen that housing costs have doubled over the past decade and about tripled over the past 20 years. And so this, of course, is not just a crisis within our city, our 49 square miles. It is statewide and actually nationally. We do know that, in particular, after the 2000 financial crisis, the home building industry as a whole took a hit, and we've kind of never recovered. So other cities around the country are also seeing real shortage of affordable housing and housing of all types, really. So in San Francisco, this is the large amount that we are planning for, as alluded to by the president. So every city and county across the state is basically assigned a target of how many units you have to plan for. So the idea is that we have to change our zoning, so our rules that say how much you can build, how high, and where. We have to change those to allow more housing. And for us, that means 82,000 units. So that's the bar in blue. I know the colors are a little washed out on the left. And basically, we then add a little bit of a buffer to that under state guidance. And then on the right side of the ledger, that's how we're going to get there. So this was in our housing element, which was adopted in early 2023. Basically, we were able to count a lot of what's in our current pipeline. Our pipeline is around 70,000 units. But we were able to say, okay, over the next 8 years, here's what we think could reasonably be built. And so we were able to count 58,000 units of that. Of course, development has been even slower than we projected 2+ years ago, but that's what we got credit for. So that means the delta that we're planning for is 36,000 units. And I'll just point out that that's at all levels of affordability. So it's the fine print at the bottom of the screen. Basically, we are not projected to meet our housing needs for below income, middle income, or above middle income. And here are the stakes if we do not pass rezoning. If we do not pass rezoning this year, or if the rezoning we pass is not sufficient to meet state requirements, we could lose critical funding for infrastructure, transportation, affordable housing. We've tallied those funding sources in the past. They've averaged about $100 million annually. We could also be exposed to the threat of fines and lawsuits. And finally, we could basically lose local control and lose our ability to enforce our existing zoning. So that's called builder's remedy. And essentially what it means is that any project that comes in, as long as it meets basically the safety standards or our building code standards, we would be forced to approve it. So here's an example from Menlo Park, where there's a developer has proposed a project that is 6 times the height limit of 70 feet. But we've seen cities up and down the state are dealing with builder's remedy projects right now. And sorry, just one more thing. I just want to put a finer point on the building that capacity, that 36,000 units. We have to create the zoning for it. If the housing isn't ultimately built, that doesn't mean we lose our certification and builder's remedy kicks in. We just have to create the capacity and then show that we're doing everything we can to basically facilitate that housing. But we don't actually build the housing ourselves, and we don't control labor costs, interest rates, et cetera. So the state is, in addition to looking at how we zone and how much we zone for, they're looking at where we add housing to. So the map on the left in blue, these are our housing opportunity areas. And these are basically census tracts that are designated by the state as having higher incomes, better performing public schools, lower environmental pollution. And the research shows that when you put housing in these areas, in particular affordable housing, housing for low and middle income families and households, it leads to really positive outcomes like economic advancement, better health outcomes, et cetera. So this is not where we built. So what's in blue makes up over 50% of our land area, about 60% of the parcels in the city, but only 10% of housing has been built there for the past 2+ decades. Instead, where we have seen housing built is the places where we plan for housing, not surprisingly, which are the areas in orange on the right. So these are areas like Market Octavia, downtown, Soma, Potrero Hill, et cetera, where the zoning allows for apartment buildings, essentially. And that's where we've seen 90% of housing built. And so the state is basically saying we need to do our part everywhere, and in particular in these higher resourced areas. And as I already noted, this is just to basically say specifically what the state is requiring. So we have to show that we're creating the capacity. It has to be realistic, as in we can't just zone over cemeteries like some cities have tried to do, or it has to be sites that we actually think have a chance of being developed. We have to, as I noted, affirmatively further fair housing, which means zoning in these high resourced areas. And we need to identify sites that are suitable for low-income housing. And how the state defines that is basically if anybody comes in and proposes housing on that site that is at least 20% affordable, we need to make that project eligible for ministerial approval. Basically say that we're going to approve it as fast as we can. And then, as I already said, the footnote about how we're creating the capacity but not building the housing ourselves. So this is the map. You all have it in front of you. I'll note that the map has 2 sides. So if you haven't gotten it already, there's a stack over by the front door. But basically, if you've been to any of these presentations before or been following it in the news, our map has shifted over the years, the past 3 years, but a lot of the principles have really remained consistent. So really, we are taking the lessons from the area plans that we've developed over the past 2+ decades. And we're extending those lessons into the west side of the city. So what that means is really thinking about growing where it makes sense, right? Thinking about placing housing in places that are close to transit, close to shopping, close to libraries and parks and other resources. So how that's represented here are the commercial corridors and the transit streets. So those are all showing up in color. Most of them are yellow and orange, which means 6 stories or 8 stories. Just for reference sake, the existing height limit in most of the city is 40 feet, right? So what we're really talking about is an increase of 2 to 4 stories above the existing height limit. There are a few pockets where we've proposed higher heights where it really makes sense. So areas like Market Street, Van Ness, Geary Boulevard, very wide streets where we're planning very robust transit like rail or bus rapid transit, et cetera. So that's the majority of the map. And then the other change that we've made in the map is that we're now looking off of the corridors. So everything that you see, and it's a little bit washed out, but kind of the light gray surrounding all of the commercial streets. What we're saying is you can build more in your existing envelope. So your height limit will stay 40 feet, but you can fit more units in there because right now we have caps basically that say you can only build 1 unit or 2 units, or you can use the new 4 and 6-plex legislation to maybe build 4 units, but you have to meet all those requirements, right? So what we're saying is we're not capping you at a certain number. We're just saying you can build what's within your box, but you have to meet unit mix requirements. So you have to have a certain number of 2 and 3 bedroom units. It won't be all studios, but basically you can do more with your existing property and your existing site. So the other caveat to this is we are baking in the state density bonus. And I just want to see a raise of hands. Who here knows what the state density bonus is? Okay. So the state density bonus is basically a state law. It was actually first adopted, I think, back in the late 70s. It's been around on the books for a long time, but then there were recent amendments to it over the last 10 years or so that basically made it more feasible for developers to use. And essentially, the state density bonus says that no matter what your local zoning is, if you are using our state program, if you provide more affordable housing, you can get more height. So this is a state program, meaning we have to allow it in San Francisco because the state trumps what we can do locally. But basically what we're doing through this local program and what we talked about today actually at the Historic Preservation Commission is about creating a local program that basically incentivizes people not to use a state program and to instead use a local program that comes with a lot of goodies that we want as a city. So what you see on your map, there's 2 sides to it. The first side, that's the more colorful side, is called our local program height map. And basically that's what you get through our local program. So in Coal Valley here, and we have a map that I'll show next, a lot of it is 65 feet. So again, 2 stories above the existing. But then on the other side of your map is a more gray map, and that's basically our base height map. And essentially, if you don't want to use our local program, you want to use a state program, that's fine, but you have to build your state program on top of these base heights. So in the case of this area right here, it basically would be 40 feet. So here's the example from Coal Valley. So as I mentioned, a lot of it is yellow, which is 65 feet. There is a little parcel like kind of over by the hospital that is taller, and that's based on the existing height limit there. But the rest of it is yellow. I know the colors are hard, but 65 feet. And then basically the light gray is 40 feet. And then in some corridors, we also have this kind of middle gray, which is basically if you use our local program and you meet all of our requirements, you get an extra 10 feet. So you actually go up to 50 feet. So that's about 5 stories. No. So thank you. That's a great question. So we use 10. So the real answer is it really depends on the construction, right? Because some people, it's 10-story to a floor. If you could try to squeeze in if you have certain construction types. So it's 9 feet, sorry. 10 feet for a floor is kind of the rule of thumb. But if certain construction types, maybe you can squeeze it in and like have lower ceiling heights. But 10 feet is a pretty good rule of thumb. So 65 feet basically means 6 stories. And in part because often the ground floor is taller. So great question. All right, so I really want to make sure we get to the Q&A because I know we have about half an hour left. So I'm going to try to go through these next parts as quick as I can. But we do talk a lot about change because we recognize that this is a big difference. In these areas of the city, the 50% of the city that's only had 10% of the growth. So we really like to talk about some of the benefits that new housing can bring because we have seen this in areas where we have rezoned. So economically, we know that it can bring in a lot of resources to our community. For small businesses, the budget and legislative analysts estimated that if we met our housing needs, so the 82,000 units, it would bring in roughly $5.6 billion with a B dollars in local spending, increased spending power, basically. So, even if we don't get there, if we get to 10% of that, that's already $500 million. The other benefits, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna make sure I can see this. So housing affordability and diversity, that is, the number one goal of this. It's really the impetus for this plan. We do know that bringing in more housing will bring in more resources for affordable housing. Every new development has to contribute at least 15 to 20% of their units as affordable. That's under law today. But then we also know that they're going to be bringing in more money for 100% affordable housing buildings as well. And then the other thing is that building more housing of all types just creates more diversity. In particular, in areas where we have more single-family homes, having a mix of apartment buildings, townhomes, fourplexes, et cetera, really creates more options for all different types of households. The other thing is that we can create more housing choices and stability for employees, in particular for the employees who are now commuting in 2 hours or more from other areas of the region because they can't afford housing here. We also know that it will bring in more revenues for public services, in particular because of Prop 13. Our tax base is low in some areas, and so bringing in new residents, new revenues that can really stabilize our city finances. And then also there's climate and environmental benefits of building in areas like San Francisco, and in particular in these neighborhoods that had good transit access, good access to other public services, as opposed to building out in Antioch or Tracy or other areas. So we know that we have seen these heights in these areas before. Maybe some of you know these specific buildings or see buildings like these in your neighborhood, on your block. These were all built before the current zoning, so they would be illegal to build today. And these are some examples of new development in various parts of the city, both affordable development as well as mixed income. And then here's an example from Geary Boulevard. We are actually just about to release a batch of these visualizations. So this of course, these are not real developments that are proposed. These are just examples. But we are trying to basically show a range of examples from different streets, different areas to give some idea of what these changes could look like. And in particular, we've really thought about views from parks and from public staircases and such to make sure that we're not really impacting the way you experience the city. This is a little bit of the data. So getting now to some of the concerns that we've heard, in particular, knowing that we have the Merchants Association here today, we have been really trying to bolster our conversations with merchants over the last several months. And I talked with Kristen Evans, for example. We've had many conversations we've talked with merchants associations across the city and really trying to hear their concerns. Because as I've noted, we are focused on commercial corridors, and they are commercial because they have businesses on them, right? And so we want to think about what the impacts could be and try to address them as best we can. But what we do know, so again, actually this is from your district, President Mandelman. What we do know is that when development happens, financing is somewhat simple in a way where it's really looking for the easiest opportunity, right? It's looking for the lowest risk, right? And so what we see is that when new housing is proposed, more typically, it's not on a site that has a thriving small business. It's not on a site that has a historic resource or housing in particular. We make it almost impossible to demolish sound housing in the city, and I have a slide on that too. Really, the developments tend to happen on vacant sites, parking lots, gas stations, auto body repair shops. And that's what we have found in Market Street and on Ocean Avenue. So this is data from those two plan areas. So over about 15 to 20 years, we built 2,800 new housing units. And in 84% of those projects, there was no business on the site before. So as you can see, the big blue wedge, those were vacant sites, right? And then the orange, those are the auto-oriented uses like gas stations, like I mentioned. So it's just those two small slivers. There were 4 businesses, basically. And we don't know when those businesses closed. They may have already been shuttered by the time the housing was proposed. All we know is that that use was on that site at one point. And it's a similar number for historic resources. The majority of housing is not built on those sites. And then it plummets way, way down for housing. But what we are doing for the small minority of projects that we think will affect a small business, what we're really trying to bolster is our existing programs and create new programs to really make sure that those projects are not, they don't mean that a business has to close, right? That there is a soft landing for those businesses. So we're doing that through a multi-layered approach. One is early notification. As soon as we get a notice that there's a project proposed, that we will notify the Office of Small Business, we'll notify the tenant and make sure that they're working together to make a plan. We are also working on relocation assistance. So that means one, like waiving any basically permits that are needed for a business to relocate to a new site and any public hearings. And then also creating a bonus for new developments to actually rehome a business. So what we're saying is if you're building a new project and you create space for a business that needs to relocate, whether or not it was on your site, it could be from some other site in another neighborhood or down the street, you get a development bonus for that. Similarly, we're creating incentives to create business-friendly spaces. So what that means is creating an incentive for things like micro retail, so smaller spaces that can be a little bit more affordable, as well as other uses like grocery stores, laundromats, nonprofit office. And then we're also creating a new type of zoning that will actually expand the places where we are allowed to build commercial uses on the ground floor. So we're not going to require commercial ground floors there, but we will allow it. And so that will gradually expand kind of the reservoir of business spaces in the city. To RTOC. Do you mind if I do that at the end? I just want to make sure I get through everything and then I can go back to the map. Yeah. Thank you for that. So the other thing I just wanted to note, we are working with stakeholders like Kristen and others around adding more to the plan. We want to make sure it's as strong as it can be. So we're looking at additional incentives. We just spoke with GGRA, the Restaurant Association, earlier this week about basically adding an incentive for tenant improvements. In particular for food service, we know that building out a new space is cost prohibitive. So making sure that we can get the developer to do the right thing and add some of those features already. And then also we are looking into the idea of allowing the developer to basically make a contribution to a fund that could go into basically paying relocation costs. As I already noted, we're trying to waive all fees. And then the last point, I think we can skip over it, but basically we had been working on kind of a modeling state law and requiring a relocation payment, but we may not be able to do that because of state law. There's related efforts right now. So Supervisor Melgar is creating basically a relocation and construction assistance fund. That's going to be heard at the Planning Commission and Board this fall. Supervisor Chan also has a pair of pieces of legislation, Workers' Opportunity to Purchase Act, and also a conditional use authorization for legacy businesses. So I'm gonna go even faster. Sorry about that, but I do want to make sure that I also emphasize. I know there is a lot of fear, in particular around tenant displacement, because we are a city of renters. We're something like 67% renters in San Francisco, and a lot of us rely on rent control, right? And so I just want to make sure that people are aware that there are already a long list of policies on the books that make it very hard to demolish existing housing, and in particular, rent-controlled housing. So what we're doing through the plan is we are bolstering that. We are actually working with Supervisor Chen from District 11 to introduce legislation that should be coming out any week now, called a Tenant Protections Ordinance that's going to strengthen these laws even further. But we know we also need to do more. This was a bad budget year for the city, but as the budget improves, we need to be spending more funds on things like tenant assistance, legal aid, and so on, just to make sure that even if you're not displaced by new development, even if it's just, your landlord is trying to evict you, that you have the services you need. And that's especially needed in a tight housing market when, it's just, there's an incentive, frankly, for your landlord to evict you if you're paying way below market rates. So as I mentioned, it is very hard to demolish housing. So this is the data. So over the past 13 years or so, we've seen an average of 18 units a year demolished. Our existing housing stock is roughly 420,000 units. So this amounts to 0.00004% of our housing stock a year that is lost to demolition. This includes projects like the Conservatory of Music, where, it was basically demolishing a dorm to build really renowned facility, right? Whenever you are proposing to demolish rent-controlled housing, you need a conditional use hearing at the Planning Commission. They rarely grant it. You really have to demonstrate a very high bar in order to get one of these approved, and that serves as a disincentive. So of those 18 units a year, about 11 units of those are single-family homes, and about 7 units a year are multifamily homes, which include rent-controlled homes. And as you can see on the right, this pie chart describes data on evictions. Demolitions make up 4% of evictions. It is far, far more likely that you'll be evicted because the owner is moving in or their family's moving in. They want to kick you out to, do tenant improvements or other capital improvements, or they're doing an Ellis Act eviction, which basically means they're taking the unit off the market altogether. The last slide, this is basically, I'm not going to go over the details because it's a lot, but we do want to say that we are taking affordable housing seriously. This is a multi-pronged approach. I already mentioned that, we have inclusionary housing requirements. We are also working actively with the Board of Supervisors, with the Mayor's Office to come up with additional new funding sources. So this is going to be a long-term need that we're working on across city agencies and with all the policymakers. This last slide is just the next step. So as the president already noted, our deadline is January 2026. Our next big milestone is a week from tomorrow. We are going to be at the Planning Commission for the adoption hearing. I think this is now our 17th public hearing over the past 3 years, so we've been at it for a while. So after it's passes the Planning Commission, which we hope will be on September 11th, it's going to be at the board. So it'll start at the Land Use and Transportation Committee, then go to the full board. We're hoping to be done by the end of the year to allow for a little bit of buffer to communicate with the state. And that is it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Any questions?
Let me start with, I'm a realtor, so housing stock is great for me to sell, yet I have a lot of concerns as a resident of a residential neighborhood. Did I have 12 or 13 questions? I'll go as long as you want to let me go. Number one, have you consulted the developers to see if any of this will pencil out?
Yes, we have. Yeah, we have a financial feasibility analysis. I'm happy to send it to you. We've also had a series of developer focus groups. We're partnering with different organizations to hear feedback on how to make this plan work, basically. Yeah. Both, right? And that's what we've seen over the years. I've worked on other area plans as well. It really shifts depending on the economy. Sometimes there's more demand for rental, sometimes condo. It really fluctuates. Mm-hmm.
Right now, part of the great charm of San Francisco is our beautiful old homes and the design aesthetic that we have. And as we've infilled down in Mission Bay and we've built Octavia and some of these other buildings, frankly, they're atrocious. And they do not look good in our city, and they do not add anything aesthetically. And what I'm slowly seeing happening, and I know this is a developer issue, I work with them, I fight them. What I don't want to happen is for us to turn into low high in Denver, Mission Bay, all over the city. If you infill these modern boxes with all of this, it kind of just kills everything that people move here for, which is the beauty, the aesthetic, the skyline views, the light. If you've got 8 feet on either side, we'll call it on Parnassus, because that's where I live, the light is gone. It's just gone. That's a big problem. And the aesthetic of it. When you start building these modern buildings, it's going to get really
Yeah. So I know that wasn't a question, but I can reform it into a question. And what's your name? Alana. Thank you for your comments and questions. So if I could just speak to the design aspect, my undergrad was in architecture. I get it. There's a range of design, good design and less good design. And I think that's true of any era, including modern architecture, right? I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think we can all find examples of really beautiful modern architecture as well. We are trying the best we can to regulate for good architecture and good design. We actually just adopted citywide design standards. And this was something that the state also required us to do. And I'm happy to send that out as a resource. It's a beautiful document, but it's basically addressing some of the concerns that you're raising, including, not just the physical design and making sure it's not just one massive box, right? Making sure that we actually break it down and there's modulation and variety and so on, but also thinking about the relationship between the building and the surrounding neighborhood. So in the rear yard, for example, you'll see in some of those diagrams, you have to step down kind of gradually so that it kind of reduces some of that impact on the neighbors. We know that it is an impact, right? But we also, like I showed in some of those pictures, we have some of those buildings in our neighborhoods already, right? And I think it's going to continue to be like that because we're not going to change the zoning and then see every site turn over, right? It is going to be very gradual and it's going to be a site here or there, right, over many, many years. It depends on who you talk to, right? I wish we had a crystal ball. So if you talk to the city economist, it's going to be different than talking to a developer. It's going to be different than talking to us or talking to the state, right? But we are optimistic that I think one of the selling points, and maybe we don't sell this enough, is that we are creating a variety of options, right? We're creating the high-rise stuff, right? We're creating the mid-rise, the 6 to 8 stories. And then we're also creating this so-called gentle density, kind of the 4-story and below smaller types that are maybe 3 to 8 units, right? And because of that, it means that we're going to have at least one of those is going to become feasible sooner, right? And we will see hopefully a mix of those over time. Yeah. And I'm happy to speak with you after.
Ilana, is this your last question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not been organized to do the water main, the sewers, the cable at the time.
Yes.
And the roads are terrible. How are we gonna fix all that with all this construction?
Yeah, and I feel a lot of sympathy for that. I don't work for MTA, so I can't speak or Public Works, so I can't speak for those specific projects. We were recently at West Portal, their Merchants Association, during the pandemic of all times, there was major upgrades to the Muni line or the rail line right there, so it was kind of a double impact of COVID plus, less parking, et cetera. So, so there's kind of 2 answers to that. One, just from a construction impact, which I don't know if that was really your question, but that's part of it too. It's both, right? Yeah. From a construction impact, what we like to remind people is that building a housing project is not the same as closing 3 blocks of Terraval to, improve the bus loading. It is much more specific to the site. And we do have policies that require the developer to basically try to be a good neighbor. We can look at whether we can strengthen those policies. We have heard some good examples of, for example, the McDonald's site, the affordable housing site on Haight Street, where they worked with Amoeba Records next door to plan their construction around the hours of operation, right? That's what you want to happen. So I think looking at how we can kind of codify some of that is really promising. But then in terms of kind of just the infrastructure capacity, I'm happy to send you a memo on that as well. We did have a hearing at the Planning Commission on that topic. We are part of the Capital Planning Committee with all of the capital agencies from parks, schools, Public Works, PUC, et cetera. Kind of the consistent message that we're hearing is, one, they already do plan for growth over time, right? But they are also planning for just the overall needs, right? So in the case the PUC, for example, they're planning for how are we going to make our water system resilient to climate change, right? So sometimes those needs are actually much bigger than the residential needs. So the residential need is for water is basically about the cost to build out the residential portion of it is about 19% of their budget compared to 80% of the budget, which is basically just maintaining the system, right? So the cost is incremental, is what I'm getting at. And then the other thing is in a lot of cases, there is existing capacity because we're planning in places like this. It's not Treasure Island where we have to build the whole park system, the whole sewer system, et cetera. These are areas that have already a pretty good level of service. It's not perfect. But in many cases, we have enough capacity for the next 2 decades or so. So we need to start planning in the out years, essentially.
Cool. Let's get, Elena, let's get another question. And we'd like to kind of right here, and let's limit it to 1 question per person, and we can go around. If you still have questions, you can get on a second time after everyone has had a chance. Please.
residential and public architecture, and I'm a merchant in Coal Valley. So for me, the charm of San Francisco, as she mentioned, is our European scale. And the planning department has done a pretty good job at historic preservation, but the onus has always been on the homeowners, and it's made it very difficult for a lot of homeowners to even develop their own property. And yet you would let big developers come in and build these giant things that kind of don't belong here. And I kind of feel like that is more money based. Like my question would be, what has the planning department done with the state to recognize that City of San Francisco is a landlocked entity, 49 square miles? We're not like Fairfield or LA or San Mateo or parts of Contra Costa County that are unincorporated that can work with this law. Where are the exemptions for our special city?
So if I could just say something about the kind of the state requirements, they're non-negotiable, right? So the time to have contested our RENA requirement would have been during the housing element, which was adopted 3 years ago. And up and down the state, there were cities that said, we don't like our housing allocation. I don't know that any of those were actually accepted, right? Because what the state is doing is they're saying, what is the need, right? And that need is not just based on population growth or what have you. It's based on what is the unmet need today? Who are the people who are living in overcrowded housing? Who are the people who are homeless? Who?
And 7,000 units each.
Yeah.
Whether it's rental or ownership. And I just feel like those kind of people don't need to own more units and build more stuff. I think if you were going to support individual homeowners like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who own 3 units, to develop and get a 4th unit, I could support that.
And that is part of the plan. I mean, so this, I think by actually adding more areas to the map, we are hopeful that this actually benefits the average homeowner as well, right? Because, it's basically allowing you more flexibility with what you can do in your property. And sorry, if I could just finish answering the question. I think something that we have heard, there have been trends over time in the home building industry. I kind of alluded to it earlier during the 2008 financial crisis. It actually kind of consolidated some of those firms even more and made it even a little bit harder for the small guys to get into the industry. I think we are actually hoping by creating more of these opportunities through this plan that maybe we'll see kind of a renaissance of some of that. And we actually have seen some of that happen up and down the state. So for example, when 4-plex and 6-plex legislation was adopted at the state level, you started to see these companies popping up basically saying, how can I help you build a 4-plex on your home, on your property, right? So, we are hoping that by saying like, well, now it's not just 4-plex, it's actually, 6 units, 8 units in the same envelope, that there's going to be more of those opportunities. And San Francisco definitely used to have more of that kind of small home builder industry. Yeah.
Let's go with the white hat.
You promised to get more granular about Coal Valley.
Sure.
Perhaps I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I can put that back up.
Is what percentage of San Franciscans are over 65 or disabled, and what percentage of the new construction will be ADA compliant?
Yeah, those are great questions. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the right slide. So this is the map, and I'm happy to speak to it. I know we have, this is an area, it's not quite my area of expertise, but I'm happy to connect you with others, or ask the question and get back to you. But what I will say is for affordable housing, there's like certain requirements around percentages that of which need to be ADA accessible and adaptable. Sure. Absolutely, right? So like absolutely. And I know, for example, it's the bathroom, you need a certain amount of size if you have a wheelchair, et cetera. So what I'm saying is I know the standards for affordable housing. I don't know the standards for market rate housing, but I'm happy to look into that and get back to you. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm happy to look into that and get back to you. I think the thing to note is in a lot of buildings that are on the market today, especially older buildings, the percentage of units that are actually ADA accessible is very, very low, right? And so that is a potential benefit of this plan by creating more units that have those features that are needed, right?
Thank you. So gentleman standing back here, blue shirt.
This plan. My name's Daniel. I'm a resident in Fall Valley. We just completed a renovation, and I wish this was in place beforehand because we would have, someone suggested, added an extra unit or two and rented it out if we could have built higher in our, personal mom and pop renovation.
Mm-hmm.
I do worry, we've got two teenagers, and I worry how they'll be able to afford to live in the neighborhood. So look forward to there being more units. My question. My question is, why can't we do more in particular on the west side of the city? 1 and 4 in this map, and was that considered? Happy with what we're doing here, but spreading it around and adding some additional.
Yeah. I mean, so I will say, we took our charge very seriously. We tried to be principled and equitable, right? And so, I kind of alluded to some of those principles that we were trying to hold to. So one is really thinking about mid-rise as our kind of bread and butter. So pretty much all the corridors are 6 and 8 stories. That's a very efficient housing type to build. As you build taller, it gets more expensive. The units tend to be more expensive. There is demand for that as well, but we know that the majority of people are middle income and need the middle income units, right? And so that's kind of part of our thought process as well, right? And then the other thing, so that was kind of the overarching principle. And then we were kind of layering in the areas where we thought it could support higher heights, right? So it isn't necessarily thinking like, where are we going to concentrate all of the high rises? It was more thinking about where is that confluence of, really robust transit access. So Market Street, Van Ness, et cetera. Glen Park, for example, we have a little node right around Glen Park BART, right? Because it's a BART station. So it was planned more in that way, not really like district by district, like we need to have this many units in D1, this many in D8, et cetera. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Well, right here in front.
My question is about streets specifically. You talked about historic preservation, but Haight Street is a historic neighborhood, and how does the city, what happens when everybody is building all of these buildings on Haight Street? How does the historic nature and the tourist destination of Haight Street still exist?
Yeah.
Because I'm all for all the housing, but we would lose the cultural gem.
Yeah. I mean, so Haight Street and many parts of our city are very special, right? And so the question is really, how do we maintain what's special about them as we add new housing? So, I mean, I think the answer I would give is to remind people that it really is incremental, right? So it's not that housing is going to happen overnight. And we've seen that in other area plans, right? Like there's other area plans where we've rezoned and 20 years later, there's still a vacant parking lot that hasn't been developed as housing, the other thing I would know is in Haight Street in particular, there's a lot of businesses that are quite small, right? So 2,000 square feet, 4,000 square feet. a developer is really looking for 8,000, 10,000, 15,000 square feet to build most efficient buildings, right? And so, in particular, in these really fine-grained commercial contexts, you're not going to see a lot of demand, as much demand for the new development, right? So it really will be even more incremental in places like that, right? But you know, the McDonald's site, for example, that was a large parcel, which you know became affordable housing. And then the other thing is, I noted if there are any sites that have housing above, then you know basically it becomes even harder to develop it as housing. So it is going to impact different corridors differently, just depending on where the opportunity sites are. Yeah.
Okay, thank
And
you.
then, sorry, just one thing I would add is I would also just encourage people to look at where we have added housing, you know, and I know people have their opinions about Mission Bay or Mission or Somewhere or what have you. But, you know, you do still see a mix of old and new uses, right? Like when you go down Mission Street, for example, there's new, you know, fancy towers, but there's also the existing old businesses and restaurants and clothes shops, et cetera. Same with Hayes Valley, same with Ocean Avenue, Market Street, et cetera. So, yeah, it is a very gradual process.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
How about way in the back row?
Hi. Um, so, so the rules are in perpetuity, right? So basically what happens is after it gets adopted by the board, it gets signed by the mayor, and then it goes into effect basically 30 days after the ordinance is adopted. And then those become the rules, right? There are sometimes we do write rules that sunset. For example, you know, former Mayor Breed had legislation around basically parking lots that sunsets, I think, after 5 years or something like that. We might be actually getting close to the sunset date, but this rezoning is not that. This is a permanent change to our rules. Down the line, should the commission and the board choose to amend it, you know, that is their purview. It would still need to be consistent with what we said in the housing element, right? So we can't downzone and then not meet our state requirements. I'm pretty sure the state would have something to say about that. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Well, right here.
Sure, sure. So, get back to it. Thank you. And I must admit, I don't have all the details in this specific map. So if you go to our website, there's actually an interactive version of the map where you can toggle different layers. So that means you can toggle both what is the existing height, what is the base height that's proposed, and what is the local program height that is proposed. And then another critical layer on there that we can toggle is what is the proposed zoning district. So I actually don't know where the boundaries are of the existing neighborhood commercial district. Maybe the supervisor or somebody from the office would know actually where those blocks end. But the idea that Kristen was alluding to is that in some of these commercial areas, right now, the neighborhood commercial district, the actual, you know, area where you're allowed to have commercial uses is confined to a small area. And what we're doing through the rezoning is on those streets, we're basically expanding it. But the new areas, we're not making, you know, the same NC neighborhood commercial zoning. We're creating a new zoning district that basically allows you to have commercial on the ground floor, but doesn't require it. Because we don't want to create an oversupply of retail or other uses, right? Because we have seen what can happen there where we have high vacancies, et cetera. What we want to do is kind of grow it thoughtfully over time. So the thought there is that if you are a developer, you probably, and you really want to build commercial on your ground floor, it's probably for a good reason. It probably means you have the tenant in mind, right? So that's the idea there. It's okay.
Saying that, let's say a developer comes in and on Parnassus, they're able to buy some buildings, they can expand the commercial district up Parnassus.
On the ground floor, right? So they still have to have residential above, right? And I can't, like I said, I'd have to go back to the interactive map to tell you where those boundaries start. So. No, it's not necessarily correlated with the yellow. This is just the height. It's not the zoning district. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Way in the back corner.
Mm-hmm.
even though your economic situation may have changed. And the same thing was true for the teacher housing, a paraprofessional who only worked for the district for 6 months could apply, and then they got housing. So you keep referring to this low-income housing. Are there going to be cutoffs that if your personal finances change, you no longer get that low price rent?
So this is more of a mayor's office of housing question. I believe that you do have to maintain eligibility because it's not like rent control, which actually is another example where it's actually not means tested, right? It's just based on when you rented that unit, right? But then once you're in the unit, you're in, right? I don't believe I think with affordable housing that there is like I don't know if it's annual or what have you. It is annual. 1 to 2 years. Yeah, exactly.
All right, thank you. How about, yep, go for it.
Are very the laws are historic, many of them, all of them. And my other main question is, I'm concerned about water. We have a shortage of water, and I feel like all this new construction should be using gray water.
Mhm.
That 7x7 miles. We're adding all these new people. Where is the infrastructure for that?
Yeah.
And are they going to be sustainable, LEED certified, long lasting?
Yeah. Yeah, so the news for you there is that new modern construction codes, including our local building code, really require very robust measures around water efficiency, energy efficiency. The president actually has legislation around, eliminating use of gas, for example, right, to really make sure that we're doing our part to reduce our environmental impact. No, gray water is another thing, and I have a little bit to say about that too. We do need some of that. I will say that, we're lucky in San Francisco where we have Hetch-Hetchy, we have a really robust system. We have added over the last, I forget the time frame, but we've added 50,000 units over the last, is it 10, 15 years, 20 years? 20 years, and our water consumption has actually shrank. It's reduced because the new construction is so efficient. And some of it is through educational campaigns, right? Like you can get rebates to fix your toilet, fix your plumbing fixtures, fix any leaks, etc. But a lot of it is also because when we replace older housing that may not be as efficient with new housing that is very efficient, we get more bang for our buck, right? So
I think the threshold's like 100,000 square feet. There's not all of these, but it's a fair number of the larger new buildings have on site.
I thought I read that they were waiting.
Are you waiting that?
I'm not, but we should be on alert. Let's look out for that. Yeah.
Sounds like it's not being waived. How about one more gentleman in the back, and then Kristen, I'll go to you.
Lisa, on this, but I'm here today as a resident of the district, and I want to thank President Mandelman because he has done the most of any supervisor, I think, in terms of addressing the historic preservation piece of this puzzle. Because the state mandates and the way the state is looking at housing is basically stripped all protection for all residential architecture in California, except if you're a designated landmark or in a landmark district. And this goes to the question regarding Haight Street. And one of the things that concerns me about our district is, and we were just in a lengthy meeting that Lisa referred to today, is that buildings in San Francisco are undergoing a survey process to determine their historic significance. We have A-rated buildings, B-rated buildings, C-rated. A-rated buildings represent around 14% of our building classification. Much of Haight Street is in fact A-rated building. But this gives these buildings we have zero protection for these buildings anymore. they can be torn down as of right if they are residential income homes. We need, and I'm encouraging all of us to encourage the supervisors to really, really look at this. And a number of us on the Historic Preservation Commission meeting would like to exempt A-rated buildings from this effort. We are told that we can't meet the state mandate levels if we do that. And so I think it's great to say, oh, it's going to be incremental, but the state is going to judge this on whether they believe it actually can be done in 8 years. And so this is profound change. We are getting profound change. If you look at this map, it assumes a 65-foot height limit in the bulk of Pole Valley and then all the way running down Haight Street. My suggestion is the other tool that we have in addition to landmarks, and President Mandelman has an unprecedented package of 14 or 13 landmarks coming to us, is that we need to use landmark districts, which is the other category. And we need to encourage the Board of Supervisors to fully fund the survey and to commit to creating districts that preserve the character of unique neighborhoods. Because landmarks are great. They're one-offs, they're wonderful. But what people come to in San Francisco love is the row of Victorians on Alamo Square, the Webster Street Historic District. And Haight Street, you think of it as historic, we think of it as full of A's, but doesn't matter. It's not historically protected, and you just need to know that as you evaluate this plan. So please get involved. Please support Supervisor Mandelman, who's really pushing on this. And thank you.
All right, thank you for the comment. Historic districts. Kristen?
Have been working in good faith to advocate for some changes to this plan. I just wanted to mention that one of the things that we have been advocating for is protection for small business. And in the Haight-Ashbury, as was mentioned, there's certain sites that we already know are being marketed for development, and that includes like old dialysis clinic space where the former Rasmussen was. But there is basically any large-scale vacancy. Amoeba could be obviously a prime target as well. So there are going to be certain lots that are going to be more appealing for development because of their size. But there's also the possibility of combining storefronts. One thing that you may or may not know is that a lot of storefronts are owned by 2 or 3 landlords on HP. So it's actually not too possible that a couple of those small storefronts could be combined by a building owner to develop. I was just going to mention in the Pole Valley blocks that you have commercial district, it's primarily the single-story buildings that are at highest risk for development. As Lisa mentioned, mostly they're not going to be targeting existing housing. And so what you may be really concerned about is losing your grocery store or your hardware store or your local bars, because those are the parcels that are going to be the most attractive for development. And I just wanted to mention that. Some of this, things we're asking for is one-shelf conditions, so that if a restaurant is displaced, there is the conditions for a restaurant back in at the storefront level. That's an example. We're also asking for a state-level program type payments for small businesses to support permanent improvements and relocation. So that could be put into place if there is advocacy to change state law to allow San Francisco to require developers to make those type of payments. But in absence of that, Supervisor Camille Hart put forward legislation that would create a fund that would provide revenue possibly through an opt-in the gross receipts tax to allow for payments to businesses for relocation. That's not a done deal, and we need a lot of advocacy for that. And so I brought some posters. We're out distributing them and encouraging people to put them in their windows to try to get support for that plan. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the comment. All right, I think gentleman right here.
Queen Stadium in Wellington, one of these yellow houses, and I want to thank the board and the planning committee for putting together this plan. I extremely enthusiastically support it. I think San Francisco is a wonderful place to live. I think Coal Valley is by far the best neighborhood in all of San Francisco. We're right next to Colgate Park. We have wonderful merchants in that downtown area. We can commute to downtown in 15 minutes on the end. It's just spectacular. So I guess my question is it better for San Francisco to move forward with this plan or to cast a lot with the builder company and see what happens?
We don't want to go down the builder's remedy route. Yeah. And I think the mayor has been unequivocal in that. You know, it's not a choice between the rezoning or the status quo. It's a choice between the rezoning or losing local control, right? And losing, you know, as I mentioned, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for affordable housing, transit, other infrastructure. So we definitely don't want to go down that path. Yeah.
Good point. I think one last question and we'll wrap it up. Gentleman in the very back.
Putting in a door out. Planning commission, would the planning commission block that or nothing?
Yeah. So as I noted, you know, in particular for multifamily housing, that requires a planning commission hearing, right? And not only does it require the hearing, which may not get approved, if there are tenants there, you have to pay for them to be relocated. You have to offer them a right to return if they're low income. It's very, very expensive, right? So that pretty much serves as a disincentive. So you're not going to see somebody buying up blocks of rent-controlled housing to build even higher density housing, right? It's just not a good business deal. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I want to thank Lisa and Sarah from the Planning Commission to do the presentation. This is wonderful. Thank you a ton. I'd like to thank President Mandelman for coming tonight and Dan and the Coal Valley Merchants Association for hosting and the rest of the CVI board. And thank you all for attending.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us. And,
Great job.
oh, thank you. Wow. We've been doing this a
Lisa,
lot. Yeah.
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just wanted to tell you.
And let us know if you have specific feedback. We like.